I was returning home after a successful business trip to my old hometown. This was the first business trip in 3 years since my divorce and final departure. That night at my favorite bar where I watched football, drank and laughed with a few remaining true friends from home for the first time in a long time. It was fun. The only low point of the reunion was when my ex-wife came to work as a night bartender. 3 years ago, she caused a big stir when she went on a long series of casual affairs and infidelities with numerous other men. Got pregnant by one of them and tried to hold me responsible for the child. Sarah lied to everyone about how I refused to acknowledge my child, defaming me so much that people who had known me as an honest and decent guy all my life began to avoid, humiliate, and insult me, even my stepmother. Apart from a few close friends who knew the truth, most of the town's residents literally slandered me and forced me to make the decision to leave in order to save my business, my sanity, and my freedom, and also to restore self-esteem. My own divorce over irreconcilable differences was relatively quiet, and no real reasons or circumstances such as her long-term affair with a 98-pound steroid user were disclosed. However, Steroid Steve was too smug a braggart. When his wife found out that he was the one who got my wife pregnant, she divorced him and took everything, including their house and car, and also received significant alimony and maintenance for the only healthy child she bore with him. Her father fired Super Droid Man from his high job. Now he cleans restrooms in nursing homes at the federal minimum hourly rate. In an attempt to protect himself during his divorce, Steroid Hunk named several other married guys who were with him and my wife at their weekly parties. This put an end to his career and provoked several other divorces. To deflect attention away from themselves, most of the husbands who slept with my wife also named others who did so, causing a cascade of lawsuits in family court. Divorce has occurred like Roman candles on the 4th of July. Divorces, as well as alienation and STD claims, have forced the state to send a traveling judge to help clear out the calendar. After 2 years of legal confusion, the ugly truth has become public knowledge. The only person in town who wasn't sexually guilty or embarrassed by his actions was me. And I was driven out by the same curious people who were now blushing with shame because they drove me out of the city on the rails. It might be useful for you to understand why I didn't do the military thing when all this happened. I realized at the time that I would be seen as a weakling for not fighting for my wife. But let's look at the situation and my options then. Should I have chosen one of the dozens of guys she slept with to be the sole representative of the entire group and contented myself with simply smashing him to smithereens? How was I supposed to choose just one of them, the biggest shrimp on steroids, the first, the last, or the longest lasting, or just toss a coin, and should I let the rest go unpunished? Or should I take on all of them one at a time or all at once? Perhaps inviting everyone into one building, then blowing it up and spending the rest of his life on the run, being #1 on the FBI's most wanted list. Oops, I missed one. Should I go back and finish the job? Damn, here's another one. And if I killed them all and restored my honor? Whatever that means, what would I gain? Her? I was a fairly normal kid who grew up and had my share of fights, but my experiences in military operations changed my perception of things. The guys I fought with taught me that it is better to live and fight another day than to fight a battle that will be lost, or worse, one that was already lost before it even started. Throughout history, guerrillas have never lost a war, and following their victorious example, I found that I could dictate the terms, place, and time of the future battle after I had time to mine the battlefield, cut their supply lines, and limit their tactical options. Apparently, I learned my lesson well. I was given the nickname the Reaper and had $1 million bounty on my head, dead or alive, that survived the war. I'm not afraid, I'm not worried, and I'm not angry. I just focus on solving the problem at hand. Once I decide to take action, I plan, prepare, and execute without passion or regret, with strict attention to detail. And when I report mission accomplished, it means completed forever, unless God starts the world over again. I haven't gone this route with my ex yet. When my ex and I broke up the way we did, There was no point in fighting for her. This battle was already lost, and all I had to do was climb out of the infected pit and put my life back together, and I did it. That doesn't mean I didn't feel the blows to my male ego. The bullets in my heart hurt like hell, but my new life was full and good, and I didn't need or want to deal with it again. That changed when I saw that she was now targeting my good friend Sam and knew that countless others would follow. Some of them had family pets. It made me reconsider my decision to leave things with her, not in the past, just alone. The mirrors through which Sarah looked at me that evening worked both ways. My gaze was on her as she took the money for the drinks and put it in her pocket without registering it in the register. She also overcharged new clients and took that money when she checked her drawer at the end of the night. On the flight home on the corporate jet, I reflected on the situation. Sarah won't stop hurting good people. Sam, the bar owner, was one of my few true friends left, and his problem was my problem. Now it will soon become her problem too. The only questions I had were who and how many, and how to do it so that Shetty didn't expect it and never repeat these trick schemes again. During the week I spent in the city, I learned a lot of gossip about so-called friends and others who slept with my wife. None of them looked good. I even found myself face to face with a jerk who was her last and longest lover during our marriage. He was now 3 times the size of the 98-pound weakling he was then. When all this happened, he was a skinny guy with a concave chest like the before picture in the How to Become He-Man ads on the back of all the action comics like SGT, Rock and Hulk when I was a kid. Send $1 or $2 and receive a brochure on exercise or martial arts. He reminded me of that little cockerel from the Falcorn Leghorn cartoons. Lots of bravery and nothing to back it up. I remember when this fool started using steroids heavily so he could skip the exercises and go straight to being He-Man. Steroid rage preceded his muscle building and only a cue kick to the back of my knees and then tackling a 280-pound Kansas City quarterback on a concrete tile floor stopped me from blowing this tiny furious guy to pieces when Sarah threw him in my face in front of me. Friends, it still hurts when the weather changes. Since then, the steroid squishy has vastly outperformed the after picture in He-Man commercials. At only 5'7" steroid puff now weighed over 300 pounds and chemical muscles had already turned into reddish cheeks, a grotesque jelly belly soaking his baby Huey t-shirt with sweat, huge flabby legs and dirty pajama pants that smelled of urine and dirty swollen bare feet in slippers. He said he stopped using roids because they destroyed his heart, but despite barely being able to lift his thick arm and beer mug with his remaining 98 pounds of muscle, he still wasn't done with his bragging. To quote him, "I left your wife when she told me she got pregnant from me." It was all about his need to feel like an alpha male, a false subcutaneous dream. What he and others did to my marriage was bad enough. Him shoving it in my face again caused the Reaper incarnation to rise again for the first time in 15 years after serving. He was now number 2 on my list, and he faced a very difficult retribution. I knew his ex-wife Claire from the time of my divorce. She was listed in the phone book, so I called her and told her that I had just met her ex and what he said. She invited me to her house, where we spent a couple of hours commiserating with our lousy exes over a bottle of Drambuie. When we got drunk, she started letting her skeletons out of the closet. Nobody knows this, but Steve is not the father of my first child. At my wedding reception, I slept with my bridesmaid's husband, and I let Steve think it was his baby. He's so proud of himself. Lately, I've been thinking I'm ready to have another child. Now is the perfect time. With these words, she took my hand and led me upstairs. We had sex until dawn, and then one more round before she had to pick up her 4-year-old daughter and feed her. I hoped she would get what she wanted. We said our goodbyes, and I headed to the client's office. After stopping at my motel for a quick shower, shave, and a fresh suit, all the other ex-husbands also lost everything in their divorces and were deeply in debt for alimony, child support, and health insurance. Some even lost their jobs because of this scam because, like Stevie, they worked for their ex-wife's fathers. The bachelors weren't in the best position either. I dealt with the bachelors who slept with my wife by buying out all their papers for pennies, their home mortgages, and equity loans, truck loans, business loans, bad warehouse contractor accounts, debts referred to collection agencies and so on, and set a legal dog on them with instructions to leave only the smoking ground like the Russian retreat. He could keep all the money collected for himself as payment. By definition, what is lifeless is already dead, and they were the living dead, a bunch of pathetic zombies with nowhere to go and no way to get there. How to harm zombies. After finally considering the male side of the coin, and with the exception of the aforementioned guy with steroid acne, I flipped the coin. On the other hand, my ex's life was too good. She was the same heartless predator. She was with me. She lived in a nice apartment with expensive furniture, drove a nice car, and wore nice clothes, all of which were stolen from me and Sam's family. I didn't care about myself, but Sam's family wasn't doing so well, and her continued predation made my decision easier. I had the time, money, and motivation to rip out this pound of flesh that was long owed to me. It's time to teach her the full meaning of the words heartless and cruel in my world. The Reaper reached full power. During the remainder of the usually tedious 4-hour flight home, I laid the groundwork for a plan to keep this beast in a cage until it had no teeth, no claws, no instincts. It was a classic bait and switch scaled up to the point where it couldn't even be detected. Once started, the plan will run on autopilot. When the time came, I watched as she entered a funnel in which her options were gradually eliminated and her options quickly narrowed, until she found herself with only no choice. The three main elements of my plan were bait. My ex entered every free lottery she could find, never remembering the names of the vendors or the prizes, and she wouldn't care where the grand prize came from as long as she could get it. She would never turn down a luxurious, all expenses paid, extended Pacific cruise on a giant ship. Think of the damn possibilities. Switch. When my ex tried to board a cruise ship at a designated foreign port, she discovered that her cruise ticket had been canceled, and her only possible course of action would be to follow the emergency instructions, which would put her in a trap. A stray cargo ship traveling back and forth across the Pacific Ocean, whose captain had to negotiate with me. She would be kept on board to keep the crew entertained before she was completely broken in mind, body, and spirit. Back then, money talked, and no one looked too closely at it. The next two things were the hardest to set up. I needed to find a port that served both crews. Ships and cargo ships was too far away for her to get home on her own, and where she wouldn't get any outside help. Then I needed to find a liner and a cargo ship with a captain who would agree to my plan, all in the same port at about the same time. It's a good thing I excel at big challenges, because that was it. The minimum distance to the port was determined by how much money my ex could raise. A friend in financial circles confirmed that she only had a little over $100 in her account, had no credit cards, and her credit score did not allow her to get a new card. I also knew that she had burned all the other bridges that could have helped her earlier. The only resource she had was what she could steal from my friend Sam between the notification of her win and the start of her trip. This was something I had to minimize. Once she found out she had won the prize, she tried to increase her theft from Sam, so I called him and told him about the theft. I didn't let him in on the plan. I didn't want her to be fired right away, but I hinted that she would be leaving soon and would need money. It will take 90 days to get a passport, and that is what she will receive. Sam was my only friend who knew my military roots, and his reaction indicated that he understood it was a mission, but he had a family to feed, and it was his decision. Considering the cost of flights and shipping at the time, the port of departure had to be at least 5,000 miles from the United States, so that she could not return home with the money that she could steal from Sam. Given the distance requirements, I went to the library for detailed maps, color photographs, and basic information about the west coast of South America. It was ideal in Terms of distance, terrain, jungle, vast areas controlled by guerrillas in the northwest, border disputes, and recent attacks and kidnappings of several suitable ports on the west coast of South America. I quickly chose Valparaiso, a versatile port city far down the coast. It is home to the major airport of Santiago. Foreign language and customs regulations, and a visa was not required to enter Chile for up to 6 months of stay. It's also a beautiful city with stunning views and a great starting point for her luxury cruise. Valparaiso is built on the winding hills of the Andes with brightly colored houses on cobblestone streets. Chile's tourist attractions include the world's driest desert and its amazing Valley of the Moon, Inca ruins, breathtaking landscapes of glaciers, fjords, hot springs, volcanoes that form part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, and the incredible 8,000-foot vertical pane towers. Photos from the travel agency would be a nice addition to the "You've Won" package announcing her prize. It was easy to let her in and impossible to let her get out on her own. The only viable means of travel north were air and sea, and she could afford neither. Chile extends approximately 500 miles south to the very tip of South America and Antarctica, where there would be no escape route, no heading east across the 22,000-foot Andes, and then 750 miles across the Argentine Pampa to Buenos Aires would bring her any closer to home. Going north would mean passing through a dozen corrupt countries with guerrilla forces, from Colombia to the U.S. border with all the border crossings and checkpoints, and she had no visas to travel through. There were also problems with bandits. A northward retreat 7,000 miles overland from South America to North America would have been impossible for a lone female gringo through all the remote areas, even for a Special Forces Jane with full weapons and support. Thank God I didn't teach her how to shoot or give her names to use in the West. If she had chosen to sail up the coast halfway along the length of South America and all of Central America to San Diego, or to board a smuggling boat, her only choice would have been to become trapped at sea. After choosing a port, my next task was to coordinate the stop times of all possible cruise ships and cargo ships in Valparaiso so that I would have enough time to organize everything. I worked through travel agencies to identify 3 Pacific cruises that met my criteria and tentatively chose the one listed in Hong Kong that I thought would most appeal to her. It was a lifelong dream translated into a 6-month, all-expenses-paid vacation that would stop for a day in Valparaiso about 9 months later. Like a bus on the sea, it stopped at every tropical island and every tourist hotspot. From Antarctica to the Arctic, my ex needed to pack everything from bikinis to snowmobile suits. Now my task was to find cargo ships that would fit my plans as a trap and negotiate with one of the captains. There are 2 types of cargo ships: corporate and vagrant. Corporate means large companies and huge ships under long-term contracts with many strict rules. No mischief was allowed, and a 1,000-foot container ship did not fit my plan. Roaming cargo ships owned by smaller companies and individuals were smaller, much cheaper, and governed solely by the laws of the sea. The captain's orders superseded all else. I needed one of those slow ships to China that operate where there is supply and demand, no matter how small the port. They might travel between 2 ports for years, or they might not call at the same port twice in a decade. I called the Valparaiso Port Authority and asked them to fax me the information they had on unincorporated cargo ships that had called there in the past year: names, dates, registrations, owners of record, contacts, etc. Whatever they have there were them. They sent me a list of 23 with basic information for me to work with. Within 2 days, I located the cargo ship owners and contacted their offices to find out when their company ship would return to Valparaiso. Using various methods, I was able to quickly narrow down the list of cargo ships to 4 and obtain the names of the ships and their captains, their usual radio frequencies and call signs, and recent photographs of the ships. Their home offices sent me mostly black and white photos of rusty, peeling, barnacle-encrusted bathtubs. If any of these floating coffins could build up enough steam to actually create a bow wave, Without exploding, no self-respecting dolphin or flying fish would surf it. An old army buddy, with whom I sometimes drank at a ham radio station and often communicated with ships at sea around the world. I called him and explained what I needed to do and that I didn't have much time. He told me to come to his house, and we contacted the ship's radio operators via Morse code. I needed to negotiate with one of their captains, otherwise my grand plan would fail. Over the course of 2 weeks, I spoke to all four by phone from different ports. One was too drunk to understand what I was saying. The other didn't even want to consider it. He was a decent man for a tramp steamer captain. The other two captains were not so scrupulous and showed their skills in trade, but one demanded too much and offered too little. I found that I could work with another captain, and it seemed that we could agree on acceptable terms. Captain, I am looking for a non-corporate ship that spends as little time in port as possible, and I want my ex-wife to remain on your ship for a minimum of 3 years with no shore leave or communication with the outside world. Senor, I am one of 3 ships that sail the Pacific and Indian Oceans for a private owner who decides when and where our cargoes come and go, and we often must anchor at sea for days until he finds us another cargo. We are sailing along the western shores of the 3 Americas through Asia and India and down through Africa. We have just returned from a shore vacation, and only Buddha knows when we will have our next one. On the date you mention, we will be transporting a cargo of copper from Valparaiso to Seattle, where we will exchange it for iron destined for China. There we will load cheap electronics and other trade goods to return to the smaller markets of Central and South America. Captain, in exchange for bringing my ex-wife on board, I will give you a down payment to get you to agree to our deal, another payment every year while she is on board, and a final amount when our deal is done and she will be landed alive at Anew port. We will agree on the amounts. Your offer is very tempting. If you can start sailing in the evening on the day I asked about, that will work well. The captain raised another important question. That can be arranged. But she is a working merchant ship, and the only way the authorities will allow her to leave port on my ship is if she has able seaman papers. I will have to add her to the ship's crew list as a wardroom. However, I can prepare a set of Chilean documents for her before her arrival at the pier. That will allow her to leave, but I will not have time to bribe the necessary official and get his real signature, and a forged signature will raise suspicions if we return. I will keep her passport and documents locked in my safe until the end of our agreement unless requested by officials. If the ship's papers are checked on our return to Valparaiso, she will be discovered. But fortunately, we are only visiting Chile 2 or 3 times a year, and they have only checked my documents twice in the last 10 years. In any port other than the United States, or if she attempts to board another ship, the forgery will be detected if she is unable to respond fluently to the port official or ship's officer in Spanish Quechuan, but I will make sure she remains on board. Okay, Captain, and please use the value of the papers and bribes to take all the money she has. Before she boards your ship, she should have about $1,200, and don't let her hide it. Examine her and her luggage. If she can escape, she shouldn't have the money. It's your money. As part of the deal, keep it. You should also know that she can swim at least a mile, and you need to keep an eye on her when land is in sight. If she sees the shore, she will be overboard, even among a school of sharks. When I described my ex and her story and sent him a very personal photo, I didn't have any more need. He talked me into letting him keep her for additional years of his choosing without any additional payments from me. I agreed on the condition that it would be limited only to his fleet, and no matter what ship she is on, he will be personally responsible for bringing her back to the U.S. alive, or my plan will have no long-term goals. We have agreed on the latest terms, conditions, and amounts for the advance payment, annual payments, for the first 3 years from the date of her embarkation on the ship with sea documents, and the final payment for her landing on American soil at the end of her vacation. After closing the deal, I immediately transferred the down payment to the account he gave me. He will receive the first annual payment as soon as she is on board with documents. and the ship leaves the harbor. Now that the port, liner, and cargo ship are blocked, I began working on the switching process. There were 7 months left until the sailing date. I needed cover for the prize, so I formed a new corporation using the ID of a young, expatriate who had recently died of natural causes in a foreign country as the agent of record for the state of incorporation. While I was waiting for the corporate charter, I placed an ad in a large city newspaper near my ex's hometown for a recent college graduate who could handle a lot of the details without asking questions. With 6 months left, I found Sandra, who had a 2.5 GPA and a recent bachelor's degree from a local community college. My ex should be able to communicate with her, easing any concerns that may arise. We spoke on the phone. Sandra, this job involves a lot of prep work for a new prank TV show, as well as a small part in a prank we're doing as a test for the studio. We will secretly tape the winner publicly, and we can also tape it in your office, so you will have to adopt and practice a stage name and a fake story. I explained that this job would only last 9 months or so, but if she had succeeded, I would have given her an excellent recommendation as the host of the edgy TV show that would launch her career. You win. The package will be sent to the target of our joke 90 days before the show moves to Chile. If all goes well at this point, Sandy's job will last the last 3 months after the package is delivered, plus a week or two for the local office to close. She agreed, and the next morning I flew out to meet her. We agreed on a reasonable salary, and I hired her, being the only person I could actually meet face to face during the operation. I never told her my real name or anything about my life or TV program that might jeopardize the plan. While I was in town, I also found out that Claire was pregnant. She told me she was going to name the boy after me and Steve as his father. Good job. Let's see if you can shell out $600 for a DNA test and a few thousand more for paternity legal fees. If not, then you will have to pay to raise my boy for the next 18 years. Sandra opened a local bank account with a debit card in the name of the new corporation with the deceased agent's taxpayer and Social Security identification number, recording the articles of incorporation with a facsimile signature, and I transferred funds to get started from a foreign numbered account. Ownership and control of these accounts were wrapped in a maze of legal corporations, LLCs, LPS, and blind trust in which I and our now deceased fellow agent both had an interest and could withdraw funds using only proprietary access codes. Anything can be hidden by burying the answer in so many unrelated and tangled facts and threads that it would take an army of Chinese mathematicians too much time and effort to trace it. Even the IRS backs down when costs exceed expected revenues and smart accountants refuse to try for fear of liability. Lawyers will keep trying because they get paid $100 to $200 an hour for their $12 an hour paralegal failures until the client screams. I paid the cargo ship captain and the refundable portion of the cruise directly from my numbered account. The company debit card was used to pay for all other companies and plan-related items such as office expenses and salaries, travel tickets, UN, etc. We were looking for affordable office parks for a small office space, and Sandra paid the deposit by a card. I told her to call me when the office was ready, then flew home to work on my regular routine and tackle the tasks on this plan. She had it ready in no time. During this time, I ordered business cards and sent them to her. When she called me, I gave her the cruise line's reservations phone number, the name of the cruise ship, the cruise package I was interested in, and the date it would arrive in Valparaiso. I asked her to find out the cost of joining a cruise at this port and to request that all their promotional material about this package be sent to her as soon as possible. When she told me the cost of booking an upper deck cabin, I transferred the funds so she could pay the non-refundable deposit using a company card. After booking her cruise, she began researching flights from the local airport that would arrive in Santiago as close as possible to the cruise ship's departure time and gathering information on how to get from the airport to the piers in Valparaiso. Once she had the flight information, she called the Chilean bus company to find out how long it would take to get from the airport terminal to the cruise ship dock, and what time of day they operated flights. Sandra called me to let me know that the last available flight was leaving San Diego and landing in Santiago the afternoon of the cruise departure. Buses ran every 4 hours, from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., so 10 a.m. the next day was the best time to take the bus. Book tickets from home in Santiago for this flight and a 10 a.m. bus ticket the next day to the piers. Make sure all tickets are non-transferable and non-refundable, and ask the bus company to send us the ticket or voucher to ensure there are no problems with this step. Also reserve a room for her for one night in a hotel outside the airport. She will pay for the taxi both ways. I also asked Sandra to book a non-refundable, non-transferable return flight from Seattle where the cruise would end back to the home airport. It would never be used but was a necessary part of our joke. We continued to work on the UN package, adding a VHS videotape from the cruise line and photos I received from the Chilean tourist office, details such as paying rent car and pet care while Sarah was at sea, and tips on how to convert your money into travel checks and stop newspaper delivery. We continued to improve and hone it right up until the publication deadline. Sandra found a startup advertising and printing company that could produce the professional quality of our UN package for $500 in less than 30 days. 120 days before the departure date, we delivered the UN package to the publishing house so that the finished product would reach Sarah exactly 90 days before departure. I also paid the remaining amount for the cruise from my hidden account. The bait was indeed appetizing for my ex, who had never been more than a few miles from her hometown. The VHS tape and various photographs previewed her of her supposed luxury trip to earthly heaven, an adventure that would give her significant bragging rights back in her small hometown. This was designed to make her think that when she returned home, it would take her years to tell all her stories. If everything went according to my plan, she would indeed have many stories to tell, disturbing stories about life stories that make men tremble and women swoon. When this was done, the published package UN looked very professional and had all the glossy visual and printed information we wanted it to have. We both checked it thoroughly and approved it. Sandra had it ready in a FedEx box with a priority same-day label and set it on her desk to await shipment 90 days before departure. I spent a day full of entertainment with Sandra, an evening of dinner and dancing, and a night of even more fun. I started writing her a letter of recommendation. On the flight home, all the things I could have written in that recommendation, but I focused on her efficiency, business acumen, and entrepreneurial spirit. That 2.5 GPA underestimated her true value in business and didn't come close to her value in bed. When the calendar counted down to the departure date, Sandra took the package to the FedEx office and had it delivered to Sarah by courier exactly on schedule. 3 days later, Sarah took the bait and arranged to meet Sandra at the office to formally accept her prize. Sandra explained over the phone that since the prize required overseas travel, a passport was required. Since the passport is valid for 10 years, Sarah had to pay for it in cash. When Sarah arrived, Sandra explained the process of the flight, hotel, bus, passenger dock, and timing. Using her phone on speaker while Sarah listened, Sandra called the cruise line, airline, and bus company check-in counters in Chile, all of whom confirmed that she had reservations in her name for round-trip flights, a bus to the cruise ship, and a return flight after the cruise ended. Sandra then helped Sarah fill out her passport application form. She emphasized that the process of obtaining a passport may take a couple of months after submitting the application. Without a passport, there is no prize. Sandra added the bank receipt to the envelope, and Sarah gave her Sam's money to cover it. Sarah had to go to a nearby building to take 2 passport photos to submit with her application. When she returned with the photos, they sent the application and photos from the rental company's post office down the hall. Sandra reviewed the rest of the package and received the necessary information from Sarah about her rent, car payments, and 2 pets. and made calls while Sarah listened, making arrangements with the landlord, the Carly and Company, and our chosen pet boarding facility. Sarah agreed to make any other necessary arrangements on her part, and to be ready to depart 3 hours before flight time with passport in hand. She was to be picked up at her home and given tickets and updates before entering the airport. With her glowing references, Sandra spent most of the next 90 days working and interviewing. She finally got a job that was some distance up the West Coast from my house. At the last minute, I decided that I needed to make sure there weren't any last-minute glitches and also get some closure for myself. I needed to be there to watch Sarah go into her destiny. I caught the previous flight to Santiago before my ex arrived and took this crazy bus journey from Santiago to Valparaiso. I practiced my basic Spanish. On the roof were cages with chickens and piglets, and in the passage they cooked dinner on barbecues using dried Vicinadonga's fuel. I doubt it's the same now, but it was fun back then. When I settled into my hotel in the evening, I called Sandra on her home phone. Sandy, once Sarah is in the air, you can start closing the office. Just don't close the bank account until all refunds have been received, bills paid, and services terminated. When the day of Sarah's flight arrived, Sandra picked her up and handed her all the tickets along with an emergency envelope explaining what it contained. She had to open it if something went horribly wrong and follow the instructions. Immediately, Sandra escorted her to the gate area, sat with her until she boarded her flight, and then watched the plane take off. Once the plane was out of sight, Sandra called me to let me know it had all started before returning to the office to pack her personal belongings while she waited for her connection to Santiago. When she called me again to tell me that Sarah was flying to Santiago, I told her to cancel her return flight from Seattle. I called to cancel the cruise. It cost me a deposit, but the main amount was returned to my numbered account. With all the business matters settled and the office empty, Sandra allowed the leasing agent to tour the space and confirm that she would officially vacate it on Friday. The corporation will slowly become lost in bureaucratic delays and will eventually be officially shut down by the state when the required annual documentation is not filed. No tax returns will be filed because the corporation made no money. This was no man's land. When I last checked with the airport the previous day, Sarah's flight had landed in Santiago. In the morning, I checked with the bus company, who confirmed that she was now on a bus to the piers with several stops to tour wineries along the way. Both the cruise ship and the cargo ship were scheduled to depart at evening tide, leaving her less than 4 hours for any final maneuvers. Precious little time. I spent the day of departure on the deck of a bar just off the freighter, sipping a local concoction called piscola, watching an old rusty barge being loaded with copper ore when my ex arrived at the foot of the freighter's ramp. When she saw the rusty old pipe creaking in its place, I expected her to immediately start calling to return home by any other means. But after a long look at the dirty old boat, she walked up the ladder like an owner, only to have the dirty sailor grab her by the collar of her designer blouse and the butt of her designer pants and march her back down to the dock. All the way down the ramp, she continued to point at her pass and shout the name of the ship at the stern as if the volume was being called up by a universal language translator. He may not have understood English, but the sailor clearly didn't care about her manners. It promised to be interesting and was worth the long journey here. I put my feet up on the table and ordered another drink. As soon as the sailor disappeared, she ran to the office on the pier. I'd bet she was going to make those help. I felt calls to home and the airline. When that doesn't work, she will likely contact the U.S. Embassy or consulate. The U.S. position will be that the Chileans pay to get rid of it. They finally let her in. Finally, the Chilean officials will also tell her no IADHAR because she already had an emergency passage home. This knowledge thanks to an advance call from me. If she didn't take advantage of the freighter passage, the Chileans were likely to be happy, and she could be stuck in a Chilean prison for up to a year before being deported as agreed. It was her choice. About 45 minutes later, she returned frowning and sat down again. About 15 minutes after this, the captain approached the side of the ship. When he recognized her from The photo I sent him, he walked down the ramp to get a better look. They talked for a few minutes before he disappeared back down the ramp with her passport and cash. After always doing well on her feet, she now found herself out of her element and thousands of miles from home. She had no more money, no one to call, and no choice. She realized she was trapped, lost in a world of her own design. She might have guessed that I had something to do with her problems, but she couldn't be sure, and didn't have time to think about it. A few minutes later, the same dirty sailor approached me at the bar. The captain sent her sea papers for me to see and sign. I noticed the official's name. Signed with my other hand, gave him the documents and the first annual payment. After counting the money and signing my receipt, the sailor returned to the ship. 2 hours later, when the cranes and conveyors on the dock had finished loading and moved away, the captain returned to the side of the ship and Sarah began to carry her luggage on board. When she had moved all her things, he made her stand outside the bridge while he gave orders to the crew to prepare to go to sea. The tugs pulled and pushed the ship away from the pier and turned it towards the harbor exit. They then walked through the breakwater and headed out to the open sea. She probably enjoyed that part anyway. I watched the ship slowly recede into the horizon before returning to the hotel to get ready to go home. Right before I checked out to catch the bus for my return flight, I called Sandra to tell her to cancel my rent, car, and pet care payments. Sarah left me with a dead dog, an empty house, a ruined life, and only memories of misery and confusion. It is only fair that now she is left without money, will soon be evicted in absentia. Her car will be repossessed and her things thrown into the street. Her pets will be gone forever, and she will only be left with many difficult memories. I called Sandy again on Friday and learned that she had closed the bank account, but didn't know what to do with the approximately $4,000 that was still in the account after paying bills and returns. Sandy, keep this money as a bonus and good luck to you in your new place and job. A few months later, Claire called me to tell me that she had given birth to a girl named Desiree and listed Steve as the father on the birth certificate. She worked to get more child support from him. If he can't shell out the money to challenge paternity, he'll have to pay to raise my child for the next 18 years or more. 3 weeks after the cargo ship sailed from Valparaiso, the captain called me from Seattle to tell me that in a few minutes at low tide in the morning, they were leaving for China with my ex on board. Everything was the way we wanted. I have my life back, as good as I could wish for in so many ways. Making money was no longer my priority. It was fun, and before I was too old to enjoy it, my days were filled with new ideas about where to go and what to see and do, and then go and do them, one or two at a time. The best girl I met. I love Sarah with all my heart, but my new love is much greater than the old one ever was or could be. Mariah filled all the holes and filled all the empty places in my heart that Sarah left. I love her name, Mariah, and every little detail about her. I respect and, more importantly, trust her. Mariah is great with children and animals of all types and temperaments and has many friends. She is very popular at parties but does not flirt and turns down dozens of guys. She can also display elegance, grace, and charm in formal society or charitable affairs. Every day is another surprise. She never ceases to amaze me. What a life. I bought a house on the beach in the hills between Malibu and Santa Barbara, and about a year later we got married in Costa Mesa in a Latin American ceremony. I think about half the population came to see us. We live in the hills behind carefully guarded private beaches, but we have access to a couple of them thanks to some good neighbors who love to share barbecues and swap recipes, but not wives. After having 2 boys in 2.5 years, we decided to space our next babies at least 3 years apart to give Mariah time to get back to her original slim self between pregnancies. Since she was protected by 2 older brothers, we both wanted a daughter next. I spoke to the captain of the ship on the first anniversary of my ex's departure to get some news and arrange for the annual payment to be transferred to his account. At the end of the 3rd year, he said that he was going to leave her because he was starting to make money from her. He said that he made as much profit on her in port as he would have made on an average steamship at sea, and that he would be able to buy his own ship in a few years. After that, I still called him once a year just to see how things were going. I even helped him with financing so he could complete the buyout of his ship. He continues to pay me back in large chunks after every round trip from America to the Far East and back. Eventually, Mariah managed to get the big secret overseas and shipped to shore phone calls out of me, and I finally told her the whole dirty story from start to finish. I could tell she didn't approve, but she never said a word to me about it. However, her family began to treat me with even more respect. It seems that I am now perceived as a much macho. A man with money, power, and heart revenge seems to be of great importance to Latin followers. Finally, at the end of the 7th year, the captain told me that my ex was no longer bringing in much money, and the Navy was tired of her nagging. So he was finally going to put her shore in San Diego along with a cargo of Christmas toys from Taiwan in 2 weeks. I found himself alone in the shadow of a warehouse at the San Diego marina where the captain said he would anchor. When the ship was secured and the ladder was lowered, my ex also came down. The ship got a new coat of paint and my deposit looked pretty good, but my ex looked bad to say the least. As she passed by, I stepped out of the shadows. "Hey, sailor, can you buy me a drink?" It was definitely a cliché line, but why use something good for it? She stopped and looked at me. There was no life in her eyes. It took her a full minute to react. "Jim, what are you doing here?" "I was waiting for you." "Did you know I'd be here?" "Wait, you set this all up, didn't you?" "Sarah, you've heard everyone you've ever met, and any one of them could have orchestrated it. They were also pissed off at you that they could even form a committee and collect donations to make it happen. But does that matter? Now, no, probably not. We talked for a while in the pub at the end of the pier. I received personal comeuppance when I showed her photo albums of my beautiful wife and growing family. Our new palatial home with a huge veranda overlooking our private beach in Hawaii with an outdoor shower in the garden, our 90-foot yacht at a villa on the seacoast of southwestern Tuscany. When it got too hot in Hawaii and so on, I said goodbye to her for the last time. I know she never returned home or contacted her family. As it turns out, I did care in her. Betrayal did matter. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.